Hello and welcome to the Reading Gorilla podcast. I'm Dale, your host for this evening, and joining me is my good friend, Laramie the Reading Gorilla. We're here to share a bit about what this podcast is about, and then we'll dive right in. This podcast is for people like Laramie here. You love reading stories, you love listening to audiobooks, but you don't have a lot of time to do it in. That said, we want to bring you never-before-heard stories of the highest quality, and we want to do it in less than 30 minutes. So, if you're on your commute, or if you're on a flight, maybe you're doing housework, yard work, homework, or just lounging around the house, you can join us every Thursday evening at about 7 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time live on Spreaker.com. Just search Reading Gorilla. You can also comment and share what you like about the episodes you hear, but don't forget to add us on your social media too. We're on Facebook and Twitter at Larry Gorilla Gur, because Laramie hates his nickname. With no further ado, here's a taste of what's to come on the Reading Gorilla podcast. Our first submission is a science fiction piece that is suited for mature audiences. Following that submission, we'll hear a children's story. An excerpt from the sci-fi short story Shell by Dale Spalding. Freighter number 3 to Xanabar Mining Tower requesting clearance for departure ID number Alpha 319-7, over.
Xanabar Mining Tower to Freighter 3, you're cleared for departure, opening bay doors now. Treat her nice, number 3, she's new, over.
Roger that, Mining. The pilot laughed, reaching overhead and flipping his direct comm system into passive mode. He reached down to his dashboard, flipped 2 switches and turned a large knob, the engines shuddering to life. He threw his eyes lazily to his right where his co-pilot sat, a frumpy woman who looked as bored as she was close to retirement. The space gray uniform they both wore were plain enough, but nothing like the shells the grounds crew had for extraction. He felt envy creep up in his chest and face. "Incoming from Xanabar," his co-pilot mumbled over thin purple lips. "You got this, Creary?" "Got it," Creary said a bit sharply. "Training what's over 6 years ago, Aggers. Just sit back and enjoy pre-retirement." Aggers humphed and folded her arms over her plump stomach, scratching the long peach fuzz growing in the folds of her neck. And still single, Creary thought to himself. What a wonder. He gripped the steering shaft to his right and gently pressed the red button protruding from the end. From deep in the hull mechanisms whirred, clanked, and groaned, retracting the anchor claws from the underbelly of the freighter. He felt the nothingness of zero gravity take hold of his limbs, which floated in the air as he allowed his seatbelt to hold him in place. He loved this. He brought his feet back to the floor and hooked the steel toes of his steel-toed boots to their harnesses on the floor. He was locked in and ready to pilot. He used his hand to spin the steering stick in place, activating the computer controls and synchronizing the freighter's 4 output drives. "Aggers, give me 1/2 burst from our ion thrusters," Creary said, his voice as relaxed as a summer on one of Earth's beaches. "You got it. 1/2 burst from thrusters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Firing." The ship separated a foot or two from the dock, and Creary reached for the throttle on his left-hand side, pressing it forward gently. Both of them felt their seats and the 45 tons of metal behind them pressing against their backs. They moved forward towards the opening growing upward before them, and then Creary cut the engines to conserve energy. As they escaped the opening maw of the bay, the emptiness of space greeted them on the True Vision monitors, billions of stars sparkling as far as the eye could see. Creary spun his freighter 90 degrees to his right and marveled at the scale of it all. Here they were chasing down the Trojan cluster of asteroids behind Jupiter, and in all of it, not a single planet loomed before them. The sun was still the brightest pinprick of light around, but it was just a glowing diamond among billions. He shook his head as he thought about the technology that allowed for them to monitor the expanse before them without a single window. A row of monitors stretching from far left to far right allowed for a 200-degree view of space, perfectly filtered to downplay glare and magnify their target. "There she is, Creary," pointing at the monitor. "You got a lock on it yet?" Creary grumbled, typing hard on his keypad to his left by the throttle, and the onboard computer showed their landing site highlighted in yellow-green. It was ahead of them by nearly 2 kilometers. A319, the single largest asteroid in the system behind Ceres. It had joined the system only 150 years earlier, getting thrashed by Jupiter's gravity and eventually getting sucked into its orbital wake. "Another con from mining," Aggers muttered, flipping a switch overhead. "Go, mining tower."
Be advised, number 3, gravity on the surface will be about 25% that of Earth, so don't sneeze too hard while you're down there, all right?
"Roger, mining tower. Taking my antihistamines now. Over." The Fox Child by Parker Yancey. In a faraway valley, there lived a fox child. She lived alone in the forest, under the roots of a large tree. Every morning she would come out, careful as she could, watching the sky carefully. She would go about her day, always under her friends, the trees who protected her. She would visit the hard-working beavers by the river, or the wise deer by their lake, and even the funny frogs that made her laugh with their jokes. But she would never leave the shelter of the trees. Every night before she went to sleep, she would climb the tallest tree on the edge of her forest. She would sit on the second highest branch and look up at the cliff. For there was a tree at the top of that cliff that held peaches, wonderful, fuzzy, and golden. The fox child had never eaten one. It was not under trees. But she dreamed of the day when she could. Nothing was in her way. She could scamper up those cliffs easier than she could climb the trees. But she was scared. The fox child wasn't scared of the cunning black ravens of the cliffs. She was big enough to whack them. And she wasn't scared of the large gray wolves who were like brothers to her. She wasn't even scared of the great red dragon, whom she thought had easier things to catch. No, she wasn't scared of any of them. The fox child was scared of the sky. It was so large and so high, and yet it seemed like it would reach down and swallow her up in bigness if she dared step out of the trees. She had never seen the sky at night. The very thought terrified her. So every night she went to sleep saddened because the peaches were out of her reach. One day, the fox child sat in the second highest branch and looked at the peaches much earlier than usual. She was bored. The beavers were visiting their family upriver. The deer were nowhere to be found, and the frogs had made fun of her large ears. They did that a lot, but today she was sadder than usual. The peaches just sat there, like they did every year around this time, with nobody to eat them. The cliff was too tall for the wolves, and the raven didn't like peaches apparently. And the dragon, well, he was a dragon. She sighed. She could climb those cliffs. Her hands and feet were sure. She could climb the tallest trees in the forest faster than anyone. And then she could eat the peaches. But the sky was clear today. She shivered and shook her head. No, not today. One day, though. Maybe when there were more clouds. She was so bored and unhappy that she barely cared when the great red dragon swooped down to land next to her tree. "Why are you so sad, fox child?" he rumbled. "I want to eat the peaches," she cried in desperation. "I always see them, but I can never eat them." The dragon looked up the cliffs to the old peach tree. "Why do you not eat them, small one?" She shied back against the trunk of the tree. "The sky is there," she whispered. "It'll swallow me." The dragon gave a great laugh that shook the leaves. "Small one, I am a dragon. I can swallow you. But the sky is an old friend of mine. He does not eat little fox children like you." The wise red dragon looked back at her, and then saw her wide eyes. She did not fear him, who could snap her up without a second thought. But she truly feared his old friend Sky, whom he flew with every day. The dragon was old, but he had never, in all his days under the sky, seen anything like this. "Small one, how will you ever get a peach?" "Wait until the sky leaves? It's been waiting there for years. It has to leave one of these days," she stated hopefully, clambering to the edge of the branch, looking longingly at the fruit-laden tree. He moved his massive head closer, and she jumped back into the shadows of the second highest branch. "What if I helped you, covered you with my wings, so that the sky could not see you? Would you go to the tree then?" The fox child peered from the shadows. "But you are a dragon. You would eat me." "Not when I'm curious, little one." She looked at the peaches imploringly, then at the dragon. "Why do you want to help me? Do you want a peach too?" "Little one, I could eat all the peaches in the world. I do not need a peach. Will you come with me?" Hesitantly, she slid to the ground. The dragon was big, and he could eat her, but he was not as big as the sky. She looked to the cliff where the fuzzy peaches waved in the wind. The dragon spread a great wing, and darkness fell over her. She gasped as the sky disappeared. It couldn't see her. The fox child began to run, fast as she could, and the shadow of the dragon followed her all the way to the cliff. She never felt grass so soft. Maybe it wasn't scared of the sky like she was, and she laughed as she ran. They reached the cliff. The fox child looked to the dragon and began to climb. His shadow followed her, and the rocks fell beneath her feet quietly. "See, small one, the sky cannot reach you under my wing." "Thank you, great dragon," she stated happily. She was going to make it. She would eat the peaches and... The shadow disappeared. The sun shone on her as the dragon winged into the sky. She froze, the breeze and the sunlight brushing over her. The deep of the sky rose above her, pulling her eyes heavenward. She cried out in fear and scrambled up the cliff, rising higher and higher until grass once more was beneath her. There was a tree. She bolted under it, hiding her face from the great bigness of the sky. The sun warmed her head and rustled her hair. Then something fell on her head. She yelped in surprise, almost poking her head out. But it wasn't a rock or a clod of dirt. It was fuzzy. She opened her eyes and peeked under her arm. There, rolling amiably towards the cliff, was a peach. She scrambled towards it, reaching at it, and it fell. She shouted and threw herself over the edge. Something soft fell into her hands, and she clutched it close as she tumbled down the cliff. Rocks bashed at her, bruising and cracking all over her. Tears came to her eyes as the sky and earth spun around her. She came to rest at the bottom, facing the sky. Her breath caught, and she just lay, looking up into the dark bigness of the great sky. It didn't reach down to swallow her, and there was something in her hand. The fox child sat up, groaning as hurt spread through her. And then her eyes widened as she saw that in her hand was a perfect golden peach. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Reading Gorilla Podcast. We'll catch you next week at 7 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time right here on Spreaker. Be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Larry Gorilla Gur.